It's Tuesday, the 9th of July, 2024, at the 85th minute of the semi-final in football's European Championships. Two of the game's superpowers, France and Spain, are locked in battle to keep their hopes of taking home the top prize in continental football alive. Spain clings to a one-goal advantage, and time is running out for Les Bleus. But the ball is at the feet of Kylian Mbappe, the French captain and one of the finest players in the world game. You might be asking, why does this matter? But the game is taking place just hours after a French election dominated by the issue of immigration. And the performance of this player from Paris's outer suburbs carries the weight of a nation in turmoil, all too often split along ethnic lines. From the lands of the Kulin Nation, my name is Emma Hoy. You're listening to Leave It to the Experts.
That's more like it.
Admittedly, Mbappe has not been at his best this tournament, playing with a badly broken nose. But the striker is hell-bent on sending his country through to yet another final. Mbappe enters the penalty box and shifts the ball onto his preferred right foot. It's an effortless move, one he's done over and over again on the biggest stages, from the game winner at the 2018 World Cup final to a hat-trick in the 2022 edition. The French captain finds his opening, seeing only Spain's goalkeeper standing between him and the back of the net.
Now Mbappe up against Vivian.
The last time he shouldered France's hopes at the Euros was 2021. As reigning world champions, the French were meant to cruise past underdog Switzerland, but were forced into a shootout. Then, Mbappe missed the decisive penalty, and France was bundled out.
Can Mbappe deliver? He's denied by Sommer, and Switzerland have done it.
Social media was relentless. Mbappe, who has a Cameroonian father and a mother with roots in Algeria, endured a torrent of racial abuse. So much so that he met with the president of the French Football Federation to ask for more support. Mbappe, just 23 years old and the face of world football, considered giving up on the national team altogether, telling Sports Illustrated, "I cannot play for people who think I'm a monkey. I'm not going to play." He claims he was told that what was unfolding was online criticism because he missed a vital penalty kick, not because of anything racist. Still, Mbappe returned to the team. He said he did it as a message to younger fans to say, France is stronger than the racism, bigotry and hate that he received. And now, in 2024, Mbappe's boot could put them right back in the frame to make the final. But only if he strikes truly against Spain.
Now Mbappe up against Vivian. Kylian Mbappe can't keep it down. That's the chance they've been waiting for.
Mbappe misses. France loses. After the match, he blames himself. What some sections of France might blame is another thing. See, French football and French politics are seemingly in constant conflict. The French national team is almost entirely comprised of the sons of migrants. Players born in Angola, players with parents from Mali, Senegal, Lebanon and Cameroon. They know firsthand the impact this loss will have on migrant communities across the country. Summed up by Mbappe's former teammate, Karim Benzema, who told a magazine in 2011, "If I score, I'm French. If I don't, I'm Arab." Some say sports and politics shouldn't mix, but these players who have toiled to bring football glory back to their home country have found themselves intertwined with the divisive parliamentary election. This tournament has been played at a uniquely fragile time for Europe's political landscape, and its footballers are not immune. Across the tournament, there have been allegations of racism against players, violent chants between rival fans, while German star Toni Kroos recently said he wouldn't return to his home country after his retirement due to what he called uncontrolled immigration. However, no side has been as actively political as the French. Kylian Mbappe came out strongly against Marine Le Pen's far-right national rally.
We see today that the extremists are at the gates of power. We have the opportunity to choose the future of our country. That's why I call upon the youth to go out and vote, to really be aware of the importance of this situation.
Le Pen, the politician who studied at France's top law school before leading the party her father founded, hit back at Mbappe and other well-paid athletes and entertainers for, as she put it, telling people how they should vote.
I believe that Mr. Mbappe is a very good footballer, but this tendency for actors, footballers and singers to come forward and tell French people how they should vote. French people are fed up of being lectured and advised on how to vote.
But Mbappe wasn't the only French footballer who feared for the country's future. Defender Jules Koundé said he was disappointed at the support for a party that seeks to take away our freedom and take away the fact that we live together. Teammates Marcus Thuram and Ousmane Dembele made similar comments.
We have to tell everyone to vote. And above all, as citizens, whether it be me or you, we have to fight every day to stop it from spreading and to stop the National Rally Party from getting into power.
The National Rally vastly underperformed in the second round of the French parliamentary elections, keeping power out of their hands and instead with the new Popular Front coalition. The Le Pen family and football have a history. The French team that won the 1998 World Cup was affectionately nicknamed the Black Blanc Bleu, the white, black and Arab, to celebrate its ethnic diversity.
Zinedine Zidane, the son of two Algerian immigrants, had his face projected on the Arc de Triomphe 3 years after Jean-Marie Le Pen's far-right anti-immigration party, Front National, had received a then record 15% of the vote.
But Le Pen's father, Jean-Marie, a strident anti-immigration campaigner, felt otherwise. He mocked what he called the rainbow team for having players he called unworthy and from foreign countries. The Black Blanc Bleu team became a symbol for a new France, one which was successful, multicultural, and cohesive. President Jacques Chirac said, "This is a France that wins and is, for once, united in victory." While newspaper Le Monde called the team a symbol of the diversity and of the unity of the country. Just 4 years later, French unity seemed again on the precipice. Jean-Marie Le Pen's National Front Party, as it was known then, pushed the incumbent Chirac to a run-off election. The face of the 1998 team and the son of Algerian migrants, Zinedine Zidane, condemned Le Pen. French midfielder Robert Pires said the majority of the team would boycott the World Cup if Le Pen won. The National Front lost decisively, but 22 years later, the party, now run by his daughter, under the name the National Rally, is back on track, making massive inroads at the ballot box. They've gone from 8 seats in the French Parliament in 2017 to 142 in 2024. It's given Marine Le Pen a sizable runway to begin her charge at the French presidency in 3 years' time. Le Pen will continue pushing the National Rally's tentpole issue of migration, despite France's cold feet at the polling booth. Immigration has fueled the National Rally's surge domestically and beyond. It's a subject that England, France's great rival on and off the football pitch, knows all too well. Fresh from an election in which immigration dominated discourse, England's national team is in a second straight European final. In 2021, they lost in a heartbreaking penalty shootout. And like Mbappe, it quickly took a dark turn as players became the target of racist vitriol online.
Now, the Metropolitan Police have opened an investigation into the racist abuse directed at England players following last night's defeat. Marcus Rashford, Jadon Sancho and also
The UK Football Policing Unit received over 600 reports of racist comments sent to English players Marcus Rashford, Jadon Sancho and Bukayo Saka, who all missed penalty kicks and judged 207 to be criminal. 11 people were arrested as part of hate crimes investigations. A Conservative MP said in a private message to colleagues that Rashford, who lobbied the government to do more to address child food poverty, should have spent more time perfecting his game and less time playing politics. She would later apologise. 3 years on, the legacy of that racism remains in the English squad.
I'm a confident person. If I score, I score. If I miss, I miss.
That's English striker Ivan Toney. He chose to play England over his mother's homeland of Jamaica.
Yeah, for those that racially abuse a player for missing a penalty or doing something wrong, then more for them.
In all sports, athletes are frequently told to avoid off-field controversies. This limitation denies them a platform for change and all too often leaves them silently bound to the persistent issue of racism in their sport. This is especially evident during tournaments marred by fan bigotry and the widespread immigration debate across the continent.
A handful of messages, the ones that came
and also,
were from abroad. They were from abroad, they weren't from people
I think they were, exactly, I think they were probably bots. I think that's probably what she was referring to.
But isn't that the thing? That has become the narrative, that we're this horrible racist country that don't like black players, when there's simply no evidence for that whatsoever.
When England started their European campaign, the country was led by Rishi Sunak. Now, it's led by Keir Starmer.
We did it!
The Labour victory ended the Conservative government's 14-year stint in office with one of the most decisive election wins in recent history. As was the case in France, immigration was a lightning rod in this campaign.
I can tell people what I will do with them. I will put them on planes to Rwanda because they shouldn't be able to stay.
Net migration in the UK has been up by nearly 1.5 million people since 2022. It comes as food in the UK costs 31% more than it did 3 years ago. Nearly a quarter of tenants are spending over 40% of disposable income on rent, and the state-run National Health Service is wilting under immense strain. Just as it had in France, immigration became inextricably tied to all of these crises by major political parties. Everyone had a solution. The Conservatives said they'd slash migration by 300,000 with caps to work and family visas. Starmer's Labour pledged to end the controversial Rwanda offshore processing scheme for asylum seekers and instead use counter-terrorism powers to smash people smugglers. Far-right Brexit campaigner Nigel Farage said net migration should fall to zero. In this environment, searching for electoral success, Keir Starmer shifted his immigration policy towards the electable Tory and the polarising Reform Party platforms. On paper, it seems to have convinced voters. In his first day in office, Starmer declared the previous government's Rwanda program dead and buried. In its place, a militarised border security command will aggressively target people smuggling operations. This type of approach has been adopted by other leaders, like Joe Biden in the US, who's invoking a Trump-like policy of effectively shutting down the southern borders to deter asylum seekers coming in from Mexico. In Australia, the Labor and Liberal parties have been locked in an arms race for over a decade to see who can concoct the toughest offshore detention policy. Shifting to the centre has arguably worked for a lot of these politicians. Biden in the US, Albanese in Australia, and Starmer in the UK all won while adopting centrist positions on immigration. But could it have been a mistake? Because beneath the figures of Labor's incredible electoral victory lies another powerful political force, with an immigration platform that many voters also find compelling.
Now, why did we vote for Brexit? Why did we do it? What was the main driver? I'll tell you what it was. Without doubt, it was open borders. It was people seeing the population of Britain rising rapidly. And of course, we go on about illegal immigration all the time.
Nigel Farage's Reform UK party managed to win only 5 seats, but 14% of the vote, the third highest in the country. More than 4 million people in the UK voted for Farage's policies of a freeze on non-essential immigration. And Farage has Labour in his sights.
We will now be targeting Labour votes. We're coming for Labour, be in no doubt about that.
The subject of immigration continues to move votes and has already triggered those now circling to take over the Conservative Party leadership from Rishi Sunak to surge further to the right in an effort to rediscover the voters who ended up with Reform UK, leaving Starmer at the centre with the power for change, but the accountability for failure. Starmer may well need to view Emmanuel Macron as a cautionary tale. The French president is staring down the barrel of his own political mortality after a series of bruising elections. Although the stunning second-round rush of votes for the new Popular Front saved his parliament from the clutches of the far right, Macron has walked away from the snap elections that he called more vulnerable than when he began.
Pretty unpredictable stuff, isn't it?
It certainly is. It reminds you of that quote from Charles de Gaulle, how can anyone govern a country with 246 different types of cheese?
Instead of his centrist alliance holding the balance of power, Macron's parliament is now split between two extremes, a right wing that wants to remove birthright citizenship and a left wing that wants to bring in radical immigration reform.
And now what you have, as you said, is 3 different blocs, none of whom can make a majority. And their factions within those blocs are not only enemies, they see each other as the devil incarnate.
The new Popular Front is a stark contrast to leaders like Starmer and Biden. They advocate for guaranteed access to state medical aid to undocumented migrants and a rescue agency on land and at sea to help asylum seekers. And while most countries seek to make it harder to claim refugee status, the left-wing alliance wants to create a new category to recognise climate refugees. It may be too soon for anyone to say with conviction that the French people have decisively shown what they want. After all, just a week ago, the electorate seemed to be calling for Jordan Bardella to be their new Prime Minister. But the consistent through line from both rounds of voting is the collapse of the French centre. The presidency of Emmanuel Macron has never looked more vulnerable, as 2 rounds of voters shun his party in favour of more radical alternatives on either side of the political compass. To figure out what all this means moving forward, let's welcome back Associate Professor Ben Wellings from Monash University in Melbourne. Welcome back to the show, Professor Wellings. Across all of the recent European elections and in the UK, immigration has been a focal point. And we've seen a lot of rhetoric against migrants from Africa and the Middle East, like what we've seen from the National Rally and the Reform Party in the UK. You know, how much of this rhetoric is tied to a national mythology and, you know, what it means to be a citizen of a once mighty colonial power?
Well, the politics of nostalgia are important here. And I think that both the United Kingdom and France suffer from the effects of a relative decline. You know, both in the previous century were great powers, and now it's hard to pinpoint exactly what their status is. I mean, they're both on the UN Security Council, they both have nuclear weapons. I mean, that would qualify them as great power status. But even the US is suffering, say, relative decline vis-a-vis China. So, and a mention of the US, of course, you know, we see the politics of nostalgia playing out very forcefully there. You know, Make America Great Again is, of course, harking back to some unspecified point in which America was great. So it's possible to mobilize nostalgia, particularly when it's related to the very sharp way that electors and voters might experience decline in their own communities, in their own economic status, and so on. The immigration thing then, of course, comes into this because if you're looking for someone to blame, there's kind of 2 places you can go. The right and the radical right and the far right tend to go to immigration. The left, thinking here of La France Insoumise, sort of say, well, yes, we can, you know, that's just a scapegoat. The real problem is the unelected capital and all their kind of supporters in the media and politics. And, you know, if we want things to change for the better, we're going to have to tackle that. So, you know, in that sense, the UK Labour Party is not pushing that line. They under Jeremy Corbyn, there would have been a lot more sympathy for that. But the UK Labour Party has moved rightwards towards the centre of British politics and is not making those kind of sounds anymore. It's very powerful when you seek to find a scapegoat for current ills and current concerns and current anxieties. And a lot of this is not just strictly about economics and material conditions. It's also about a sense of security. You know, do you see your neighborhood changing? Do you see your country changing, even if you don't live in a diverse neighborhood? And that creates anxieties, and that can be translated into a politics of resentment and, in certain cases, a politics of nostalgia.
With the expectation of Marine Le Pen running in the 2027 French elections and Nigel Farage looming as a likely thorn in the side of Keir Starmer's government, how will immigration and these nationalist political parties continue to shape our politics over the next few years?
I think what's happened, if we make a comparison over time, and I'm going to go back to 2002 when Marine Le Pen's father successfully got through to the final round of a French presidential election, and this was a big shock back in that time, because the conventional wisdom back in 2002 was that a far-right party would never get more than 10% of the vote. You know, that they appealed to a certain small segment of the electorate, and you're always going to have that level of kind of people you could mobilize through racism, but it wasn't going to extend beyond that. I think that far-right and radical right parties have successfully translated their appeal to a broader spectrum. I think that they appeal, and in the far right in France does seem to appeal to younger voters far more than it used to. I think that the fact of having a woman at the head of the party probably appeals to women more than the far right used to. And so in that regard, they've been successful. If we look at Reform UK's vote share of 14% in the UK election, again, that's slightly higher than the sort of 10% benchmark that we used to have, is fairly consistent with what the predecessor of that party, the UK Independence Party, was getting in the 2010s in elections. So it's here to stay. It's definitely improved on what it was. I don't think it's yet had the breakthrough that perhaps its supporters might have been hoping for in these French elections. And it's certainly, I think, dragged the political debate rightwards in Europe and no doubt the US as well. So the short answer to your question is yes, it will. It's been there for a while, but without being complacent, it's perhaps not had the breakthrough that its supporters hoped it might.
Over the last fortnight, we've seen massive results in the UK and French elections, and voters in both countries seem to be turning away in droves from their incumbent governments. So why are voters so keen to punish their ruling parties? And why is there a failure from the centre to inspire voters?
I think this instance of voter disenchantment or even voter anger, in the short term, of course, we could put this down to a cost of living crisis, people's purchasing power going backwards, their sense of that maybe certain groups are having their status diminished within the socio-politics. But in the longer term, there does seem to be something that needs fixing with politics and politics' relation to the economy. So I think when we see people like Emmanuel Macron, who've really nailed their mast to the neoliberal project and that of liberalisation, it seems to be running out of steam. And we are perhaps sort of living through the end times of that post-Cold War settlement where deregulation and opening up markets was seen to be the wave of the future. And now we're turning to something that is a little bit more, requires a little bit more protection for, say, workers' rights, and doesn't leave people feeling both vulnerable and exposed economically, but feeling like they don't have a way to influence politics other than deliver shock protest votes. So I think that comes to your question about the centrism. What's wrong with the centre? Well, I mean, it's kind of important that some form of centrism holds when the challenge is coming, as it has recently, from the far right or the radical right. I mean, we start to shade into the hard right, but of course that's a kind of a legitimate. It might not be everyone's cup of tea, but it's legitimate in a way that a far right challenge poses lots of questions about the moral legitimacy of these sort of actions. The centre somehow needs to come up with a better narrative other than the current setup is beneficial for some people, and I think it needs to find something inspirational, and it needs to find a way to protect people from the worst ravages of the current economic setup. And so I think that we need some fresh thinking around what the role of government is in terms of relation to the economy and what the economy is supposed to do. Do we need to prioritise communities over the market? And all these kind of things, which will, I think, take the edge off some of the feelings of resentment, and address some of the feelings of anger and resentment that people feel towards the political class.
One of the major themes we've seen throughout this French election is that the French people seemingly can't really decide what they want. In a week on they vote for far right, and then a week later they vote far left. We've seen this indecision and fragmentation happening in democracies across the world. So what's driving this shift?
On the surface, it seems to have 1 week voted a plurality for the far right and the other for the far left and what's going on. I think that can be explained by the tactical voting and the decision to keep out the far right. When we look at the far right's votes in the European elections in June, the far right still gets about 33% of the vote in all of those things. Its vote has remained consistent. If we dig under the surface of the UK election, which delivered a very decisive electoral majority, but when we look at the vote share, a picture that looks a lot more like France, it is to do with this fragmentation, and it's particularly the fact that political parties of the centre-left and centre-right no longer attract the voters, A, in the numbers that they used to, and B, with the convictions that they used to. So voters now will shop around, but in some ways, the United Kingdom is now a 5-party system rather than a 2-party system. And in French politics, as in German politics, we've seen the centre parties' support whittled away. Now we've got a political system or systems in which narrow casting is much more the norm, and fewer people vote for a larger number of parties. So it is that fragmentation that you've mentioned that creates these kind of outcomes, and the political uncertainty that goes with it, at least as far as those seeking to govern their respective countries is concerned.
Professor Wellings, enlightening as always. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
On the next episode of Leave It to the Experts, we look at Europe's young voters and what's swinging the pendulum for them. The most multiracial generation to have ever lived is facing the most uncertain future since the Second World War. They'll see irreversible consequences of climate change, face a hostile housing market and a stagnating global economy. But where their political allegiances lie is a complicated question. From the green extremes trying to shake up the system to Jordan Bardella's Gen Z army of fans, the restless youth of Europe are ready to shape the future. Our in-depth coverage continues at 360info.org. You can sign up for our newsletters and Newswire for journalists and learn about our work with university experts worldwide to find misinformation. This episode of Leave It to the Experts was produced by Michael Joyner, Reese Hooker and Lachlan Gaselli. Music by Jan Skubaszewski at Red Moon Studios. I'm your host, Emma Hoy. See you next time.